So I actually never thought we'd be talking about the Pope on this show. There is nothing I love more than reading deeply dense institutional documents. So, really excited to be sitting down in a week where Pope Leo put out an encyclical that I can't pronounce, which you're.
Magnifica Humanitas.
Yes, okay. Magnificent Humanity that directly addresses AI in this moment. And to set the stage for folks, and maybe I'll have you give a bit of an overview of some of the ideas. One of the symbolic things that really sat with me, which was clearly intentional, was that the Pope signed this encyclical on the 135th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, which was the previous Pope Leo's kind of massive statement about the Industrial Revolution. Can you dive in a little bit for folks who maybe didn't read the 42,000 word document? Like, give us the basics of what's going on.
It's been really interesting as this has come out, there's been this real pushback. It's like, what does the Pope have to say about AI? Like, this is ridiculous. Why would we be listening to the Pope about AI? I do think, however, that the Pope is talking about AI, but with obviously the lens of ethical and moral on top of it. So the conduit, but ultimately it's what do we as a society believe and hold true? How is the Catholic Church framing the use of AI for the benefit of people? And I think that when you go through the whole document, there's a number of different elements that they're talking to, but probably the ones that are most outstanding are the ones related to labour. What does this look like for the dignity of humans and the dignity of work as part of the AI revolution? Talking quite, I would say, sharply against the use of AI in war, automated weaponry, which was a massive middle finger up, I think, to the ongoing battle that's been happening with the Vice President of the United States, particularly given how much he rails about how awesome he is Catholicism, yet still doesn't defer to the Pope on moral and ethical matters, which just gives me all the ammunition I need in my mind to really understand the type of person that J.D. Vance is.
I mean, we have a term for that. So for folks who don't know, Cara and I were both raised Roman Catholic, but are not practicing. We just called those cafeteria Catholics, right? You just pick the doctrines that you like.
See, it's quite interesting.
I'm not defending it. I'm just saying it's a thing.
No, it's actually because I grew up really Catholic. My grandmother was really Catholic. My mum was Catholic, but really I was always pushing up against the sort of structure, the position of women inside the church. There was a multitude of different things, but then ultimately I didn't have faith. So that's probably the clincher as to why that didn't work out for me. But it's interesting because going through what actually was a real moment for my family specifically was what had happened with child abuse inside the church. So a lot of my family, extended aunts, uncles, who had been born, raised and practicing Catholics at that point actually peeled out. I went to an all-girls Catholic school. However, that school was very progressive and was very much based inside social progressiveness. Typically, the Catholic Church is very conservative inside their belief systems. There are different parts of the church, and it's quite interesting to see how Leo has come out and representing a new type of Catholicism, particularly in this modern context.
Well, I think that was something that was really interesting to me that might be underappreciated if you're not kind of in Roman Catholic culture, because my experience, so I grew up in Michigan. I went to 16 years of Catholic school, so preschool all the way through year 12. And I was deeply involved. Like, I sang at church every Sunday. And for me, I was very religious, and my kind of grounding in that was very much in these like Jesus-based teachings of help the poor. This like the social justice side was something that I really connected with, and that I've kept in my life, but I walked away from the church kind of for the same reasons of, for me, it was the homophobia. I think it is important to note that Leo is taking a very specific stance here. So even, in the encyclical, challenging the idea that human dignity comes from work. Not that there isn't dignity in work, but saying that productivity is actually not relevant to the dignity of the human, which is quite Marxist in its orientation. And so what might be underappreciated is there's another faction of Catholicism that is very MAGA aligned, that is very conservative, and leaders in that movement are calling the Pope a heretic. And so understanding that while the kind of Francis to Leo progression has very much been a clearly articulated choice going back to the social justice, I mean, literally the teachings of Jesus, version of Christianity. But that is a big deal. He obviously was taking a direct shot at Trump and Vance in terms of the use of autonomous weapons, questioning something that, interestingly, I'm writing a paper on, which is whether it is possible to have human oversight of even semi-automatic weapons or decision support systems. So that's interesting in that there's this power play. But the next kind of human piece in this, and I'm really excited for whatever spicy thing you're going to say when I bring this up, is, it's been commented on who the Pope chose to platform when he announced this encyclical. So there were theologians, but there was also a co-founder of Anthropic.
Okay. Well, look, I think there's been, like, Tim and Jebru came out with a article regarding who the Vatican was platforming as part of this announcement, which I very much understand the argument around. And maybe I've just got my public relations hat on as part of this conversation. So the argument really is by having a connection to Anthropic shows a allegiance, and I say allegiance not in terms of like deferment, but just in terms of like who they platform as part of that conversation. Essentially, they didn't choose to bring a data laborer in from Nairobi. They didn't choose to, show a teenager who's had, mental health issues related to. And I think the conversation, particularly from Tim Nicheburu's perspective, is obviously the Catholic Church has lots of investment inside these spaces. Like, whatever you think about Catholicism, they are a very rich center in power, ultimately. They have access to very deep pockets, and they do have investments inside that space. Whether or not I think that was a motivating factor inside this announcement, I don't know. It's a fair argument, maybe, potentially. But my argument is that what was the really kind of impactful moment of this was to try and get as much of the conversation and zeitgeist talking about AI in a way that was bringing human dignity front and center. If the church had gone to Nairobi and done this as a PR release in a data center in Nairobi, would it have gotten the same traction? I very much doubt so. Like, it would not have moved the same amount of conversation in the area than having an encyclical that was announced at St. Peter's with leaders from big tech. I think that there's something there that those conversations will come. I think that it's hard to have those conversations at launch and get the noise around launch. And if anything, I think that this Pope is far more politically savvy than what we've seen before.
Oh my God. Okay. Definitely politically savvy. So I hear you and I disagree. Or I don't know if I disagree. I think I'm going in a slightly different direction because I don't think you're fundamentally wrong. So I think there's kind of two lines of critique that I've been seeing about the inclusion of Ola as a part of kind of who was on the dais in that moment. And I do think it is a strategic and important choice to have someone on stage who represents the powerful, who generally don't give a about this. So I think that's important because without that person being there, it is too easy for those in power to ignore it and say it's irrelevant because this is written from a place of not understanding the constraints of frontier AI. So having someone there plays a really important legitimizing function to the power structure that needs to be influenced. But where my critique goes is you can build the stage as big as you want. You could have also flown in someone from Venezuela or one of the laid off Black women who used to do DEI who are now doing day laboring to like pay their rent. The point, there are people who are doing this, and including someone like the co-founder of Anthropic does not preclude you from also including someone whose dignity is perhaps being most horrifically violated by this technology project. And I think there is an incredible radicalism in placing someone like that on the same stage. Like that, to me, would have been the ultimate political move because it would have shifted the Overton window by saying the dignity of the person is inherent, and I am elevating two people who the world considers different, to the same positionality with me on stage. So that's what I would have wanted to see. I strategically understand the use of the powerful, and I think it was appropriate, but I think it was an incredibly missed opportunity to subvert power structures in a way that I think Leo is trying to do.
Look, I agree with you. I do agree with you. I wish that was.
Is this the first time I've won?
Well, I haven't finished yet. I agree with you that that would have been an opportune time. I do think, though, when you look at political strategy and what would resonate the most in that moment, I think that by cluttering the argument or making or diluting the actual argument, which was a focus on the release having the legitimacy of power there is the whole output that comes next. That is part of the argument that will come next. And I think we just have to kind of think of it in the same way that when we see political messaging, it's hard for people to compete. And like, as someone who's informed in this area, absolutely, I would have loved to have seen that. However, we're talking to the majority of lay people, particularly inside the Catholic Church, who really haven't maybe, and I'm not saying, obviously not saying all Catholics aren't tech savvy, because there's a lot that are. There's people, all different faiths, all different, there's a whole heap of diversity there. But from a bureaucratic perspective, muddying the water with a new angle, which would have been potentially more politically based at that moment in time, would have diluted the message. Now, as I said, totally would love for that to have been the case. I do think, would it have been sticky? Would it have translated to the majority of people? Probably not. It wouldn't have. But ultimately, it was about a discussion of power.
Oh, it was absolutely about power. So I think I agree with you. I just want to add like a bit of a label to what you've said, because you said the majority, and I would actually disagree with that. I think the majority of the West and kind of the centers of power that are controlling AI, I would agree with you using the word majority. But I'm also thinking about the fact that in terms of Leo's constituency, that is actually the global majority, meaning, the majority of Catholics worldwide are Black and browns. And I understand the strategic calculus, but like there is a very specific audience for that message, and it was clearly curated that way on purpose.
Inside the encyclical, it does talk about colonialism, basically digital colonialism. What we've discussed before in terms of techno-feudalism never felt so validated.
Oh my God.
Being beaten a drum over for so long, it's now like coming to fruition in a way that's legitimized.
Honestly, why didn't you call us? We have thought. So I actually want to talk about power and messaging, but from a different angle, which is kind of the anthropic angle. We're talking about positioning and power. And I haven't seen as much talked about this, which is the strategy of having Ola on stage. And I think, just to draw a line of what's been happening with Anthropic, because I think this is one moment in a larger arc, is that the realities around the world for the AI resistance and the backlash are rising. I don't know if someone would anticipate that people going on years saying your entire economic order is going to disrupt it and the solution for how you're going to pay for your basic necessity go well for them, but they don't need for PR. But if I see this Anthropic kind of repositioning, certainly they were founded to be kind of the safe frontier lab, but their kind of fight with the Pentagon, I think, really kicked off what in the public imagination was this characterization of Anthropic as like the good guys in frontier AI. And I think it is incredibly convenient for them, while they are subject to the same ridiculous economic pressures that require them to do things that make ethics really difficult, if not impossible, that they are realizing the US is on the decline. So associating themselves with the Vatican, even if it is not a current kind of Anthropic employed, that is a strategic pivot to their characterization of themselves as the safe and responsible lab. And economically, it makes sense. Europe is divesting from America. They're an American company. And so any way that they can ingratiate themselves into that market or markets that might consider the Vatican, if not a moral authority, at least a relevant moral voice. Like I am not saying that I actually believe that Ella was sincere in what he was saying. And I think it's important to acknowledge the complicatedness, but it is impossible for me not to name how unbelievably convenient it is at a moment where OpenAI is becoming the boogeyman with the Musk versus Altman case. that it's very convenient for Anthropic to be the chosen ones with the justice power.
Nothing to argue there. I think like, I don't think there's anything other than, yes, absolutely, it is very convenient for them, great for marketing for them. I don't think that there's any reason why they would push back against it, because this is 100% their marketing position.
They just saw this LinkedIn post like right before we walked in that basically painted like advocating for AI literacy and ethics as like an opposite ends of the spectrum. And it was a super silly post, but the reason I think that's relevant here, a concern that I have, which we will see again, this is just the encyclical drop. Like there's
Yes.
things to follow, but the idea that thoughtful ethics is not a part of the AI literacy conversation
Oh, of course.
is challenging. And the reality is the average person, like, I'm sitting here thinking of my dad, who is someone who is very highly educated, who seeks out new technology, who learns stuff, but isn't kind of the early adopter. He would probably have the opinion that Anthropic was the good guys. And because of this, it sidesteps the inherent challenges with these kind of mega frontier labs, cautiously watching the way his critique of power rolls out to more pointedly look at Anthropic and their ilk and say, it is great that you are acknowledging the ethical problem. It is great that you are welcoming people to give you feedback on the things you can't see. But the question to you is, and what mechanisms are you building such that they have actual influence on the decision making at
Mhm.
Anthropic? And that is the thread that I don't see.
But they did, like, and this is again, they have, I think it was in March, they had brought on ethics guidance from religious leaders as part of their internal fine-tuning training mechanism. So it is something that they have been somewhat active in talking about. Obviously, Amanda Askell, the key philosopher, and the Soul Doc that came out, they obviously are having these conversations that they don't have answers to. And I think it would be a difficult place to say that someone would have answers at this point in time. So I think that this was pressure on frontier labs. It was pressure on the United States to actually change the model. I think it's been so advantageous for China, who is seen coming away from this being noses clean, doing the right thing. You know, they're putting in labor laws that need someone to shepherd the conversation. And I say shepherd meaningfully because obviously that's the role of a pope. But how, like, you have to have clarity in the positioning. And I think that this did an amazing PR job for the Pope and the church. So this kind of realignment and advocacy for workers, for poor, for, you know, disadvantaged, for access and equity. And it has unwound decades of movement away from the church in a way that I think is going to reinvigorate a massive new cohort of young people towards exploring this religion more.
Totally. I mean, I agree. I'm having a week, I guess, in like for me to see a pope that's speaking in a way that aligns with my values, because so much of my disillusionment and moving away was having a deeply held set of beliefs about helping marginalized,
Hmm.
basically. And to see the structures around me, not formally, there were so many beautiful people that were, a part of my childhood that but seeing the child sex abuse handles and the way that women were sidelined, the way that, queer people had to hide, even though they were the glue of the community, it actually gives me hope. And do I think I'm going to go back to institutionalized religion? Like, no, institutions and I don't mix
Yeah.
super well. But I literally wept as I
Mm.
was reading the encyclical, because as someone who so deeply believes in the values of justice, and if an institution, even that I think is problematic, is stabbing them, that is a sea change. So I don't want to sound like a complete cynic. I'm actually not. I actually feel such a well of hope that the number of people who care what that Pope says is incredibly high. And in a lot of ways, a lot more than what Sam Altman says.
Yeah.
That is hopeful in and of itself. One thing, to go back to one of my kind of bugbears about this. So I do appreciate that Anthropic is engaging religious leaders in this. And if I remember my reading correctly, all the Abrahamic religions were presented, Buddhist, Hindu, kind of major world religions, which I think is great that it's a plurality, but also being thoughtful that those are majoritarian religions. And so again, going back, this is a process of replicating homogeneity in that there is, in I'm really passionate about small languages. I'm interested in rare and small religious and spiritual practices. Like, I wonder what we could learn, and I know this is a very specific example, but from like Drew's religious practice in California. My point is that there are religious traditions that are important, valid, and that will be captured by these conversations. And I wonder what we as humans will lose morally by not having that diversity.
I think, like, totally valid point. I do think, however, that the reason why Abrahamic religions are selected is because it's been the basis of a lot of the legal statutes that we have inside Western society. But this is why I think they lean heavily into philosophy. Like that is the element of capturing humanity. What are the considerations that we need to take into place? So we are so at the very, very beginning where, like, it's a 100-meter race. We're at meter 2. There's absolutely reasons to interrogate it. And those conversations and I'm happy to entertain them.
Really, but I really like that you're a bit more of a hopeful balance today to me. I think that's really good. But I go back to this core thing, and it just, again, I'm an ethicist, so it's always like, what should we do? What ought we do? And the question is, I think it is legitimate, given that we're at year 2 of 100 on this journey, that we're asking really complicated philosophical questions about the nature of humanity and what artificial intelligence is, given its emergent properties. But the thing where I fall down is I'm like, like, you could have not put that in the market if you didn't know the answers. And so I do not have an answer to this. I genuinely do not.
Okay, thought experiment. As a HR professional. Okay, so you're now working in an organization that is either mandating or implementing AI as part of its framework. Someone inside the organization or a group of people inside the organization cite religious reasons now.
Oh my God, I love you so much that you're asking this question.
Because of what's come out in the encyclical, what would your approach be? Is it now compatible that a religious stance against AI? Because historically, I say historically, very recent history, as AI has been rolled out, obviously there's really been no tangible pushback. And so if you're now in an organization that is rolling out AI that isn't respecting not only the dignity of the individual, but the dignity of work through its AI implementation process, is this now creating a discrimination access point?
So I think yes. So there are some jurisdictions that already do have like religious conscientious objection like laws. So from an HR perspective, like there may be existing legislation you are subject to in this. But yes, the encyclical creates the funny you bring this up because my Instagram is awash today of kind of resistance activists like teaching people how to use their jurisdictional conscientious objection rights to push back on AI on religious grounds now. So I actually think this is really interesting and promising. I'm interested from a resistance activism perspective, leveraging this. But I really believe, and this is something that I'm actually talking about at work right now. I work full time at the Ethics Center, and we are having conversations about the way that AI is used at the organization. What does it look like to enable people versus what does conscientious objection look like? And I'm going to be honest, what I love about it is that we don't have a finite example. And sharing stuff soon about our approach, which very much includes a right to opt out and a future point at which we will make a decision about what conscientious objection philosophically means and how one might do that and what the outcomes are. But something that's really important to note, and I actually, like, I never thought of it this way, but Dr. Simon Longstaff, who is at the center, said this to me Monday, and I've been thinking about it for 3 days, is the ability to conscientiously object does not accept you from repercussions for that objection. So the core of it is respecting the individual agency to make choices in line with their ethical and moral beliefs. And that, I mean, we all agreed was critical. I actually had experience designing policies and processes to facilitate this, but the line that tends to come up, and the language is often used with like disability accommodation, is the idea of reasonable accommodation. And so, for example, if someone requests some particular support for a disability, the default is that the business should grant it unless it creates unreasonable burden on the business. So it's expensive or commercial objectives can't be met or whatever. And so I think that's slightly different than this kind of opt-out conscientious objection, but I will not pretend I have the answers. I have strong opinions. And I'm going to give you mine, but then I really want yours. Is so let's say an organization that is doing mission work adopts AI in ways that preserve human decision-making ability and truly augment the work that's being done. So that use of AI makes people more productive at the service of some worthy goal. As folks know, I don't think productivity isn't
Mhm.
goal. And one person conscientiously objects to using AI, but that means that they take 4 times as long to do the tasks needed in their role compared to a peer in the same job. But is it acceptable to then basically make it a mandate that you must be AI literate and use it in augmentative ways in your workforce? So the idea is like you wouldn't necessarily fire someone for not using AI, but if you had clear performance metrics about the outcomes that were required in a particular role, and they shifted because AI use enabled something that was not possible previously, is it discrimination or unfair if that person is let go because they no longer meet the outcome requirements of reimagined roles? That to me, in even the most principled situations, is a really complicated ethical question.
Mm.
That my argument is what is the purpose? Like for me, I have a really hard time with the purpose being "Well, the shareholders need to make more money." Like that to me
Yeah.
is ethically greater than an organization that's purpose is something that is contributing to social welfare. But I
Yeah.
think it's a complicated question.
No, absolutely.
I'm curious about you because you help organizations do this and think through it. And I know how much ethics is important to you. So
Mm.
like, I guess give me your vibe.
I think it is a hard question, and it is a reasonable question. I think the thing is what is the organization doing to maybe augment or support the person to understand if they do have conscientious objection, how would you facilitate? Because it's the same as like, let's imagine it's a plowing a field and they've got access to a tractor or you've got access to a hand hoe. Like if an organization during that transition process was like, hey, we're expecting this level of output, but you're not going to be able to do it. Like, how do you actually understand the position and then accommodate the use to either increase alignment to mission? Because, like, particularly in the instances and post this Pope, well, we've had many a call from that religious sector. Many nuns and priests have actually contacted Ethic AI to, to discuss AI literacy, which I love. I absolutely love. But it is one of those things I think is really interesting as we've gone down that process of, I think that in terms of how I would address that, understand the reasons why someone has, because I would totally understand if someone's saying, I don't want to use OpenAI. I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's a problematic system. I don't want to use it. And so, okay, so cool. So can we use a small language model? Would you have an issue with that? And typically the answer is okay. So essentially it's a tool that we can use. It has limited parameters. It's not going online. You're able to preserve privacy, IP. There's now a way for us to then pay people for their labor as part of that process. These are all questions that we have to start addressing because they're problems that are springing up. And this is why there's so much rage, because these fundamental questions aren't actually being answered. But there are opportunities if companies want to invest not just in productivity, but in what is the purpose of work other than to give people a relationship with mission and cause. And I think that the post-war has been a obsession with productivity and GDP, which I don't think is the best outcome for not only like any civilization, but any individual as part of that civilization. So what are the things that we're driving towards? This is why the encyclical actually is this moment of realignment to what is the purpose of AI if not to serve humanity in ways that preserve the dignity of humanity. It really takes me back to like conversations that I've actually seen with Amanda Askell, who's the chief philosopher of Anthropic, bringing it back to Anthropic, and other frontier labs have paid some level of lip service, but having this public personality that's really talking about the impacts of the philosophical kind of tension that needs to be held with AI. As we're going through this, the type of thinking, and when we talk about AI literacy, it is a different type of literacy than what we're considering. I think a lot of people are talking about AI literacy being technical literacy, talking about how to use a thing. Realistically, it's what questions should we be asking? And that is a very, very different set of skills than what I think that society or that education is driving towards, that university education is driving towards, that work is driving towards. We've been since the Industrial Revolution. And so to bring it back to Rerum Novarum, because that was actually truly mind blowing at the time because union movements weren't established. And so it's been funny because I've been talking about Rerum Novarum and kind of looking at the timeline of how that happened. People are like, oh, have these people never heard of a union? I'm like, unions didn't exist. It didn't exist.
Critiquing the moment, I think that there is a possibility that this leads a big shift. And I think the other thing that I'm holding on to, that idea that Julio was saying that there is dignity in work, but humans do not have dignity because of work. And that goes to this idea, I think, to our core thesis of these discussions is that other options
Exactly.
are possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's leave it on that note. Yeah.
Good vibes.
Cool.
I want to know what folks leave a comment. Like, what are your unsolved ethical questions? What are you tangling with as you try to learn the tech while understand that it's a gray area?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, as I said, we're always open to suggestions if you've got questions and want to have answers. Yeah, cool. Gotcha.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?